The woman on the screen didn't know the camera was still on. That was her first mistake. Her second was everything she said while she thought it wasn't. Providence Municipal Court had been running hybrid hearings for 18 months by the time this particular Tuesday morning arrived, and Judge Frank Caprio had adapted to the format with the same patient attention he brought to everything. The reading glasses balanced on the edge of his nose, the careful way he addressed each face in each small rectangle on the screen, the warmth that somehow transmitted itself through a camera and a fiber optic cable and arrived intact on the other side. The court had grown accustomed to the occasional technical hiccup: frozen screens, barking dogs in the background, children wandering into frame. What it had not grown accustomed to, what no amount of experience could fully prepare a courtroom for, was what Tanya Briscoe said in the 45 seconds she believed her microphone was muted. It was not muted. Every word landed in open court, through the speakers mounted on either side of the bench, with a clarity that suggested the audio system had chosen this specific moment to perform at its absolute best. The clerk looked at Judge Caprio. Judge Caprio looked at the screen. The gallery, a dozen people waiting for their own cases, scattered across the benches in the morning light, looked at each other. And Tanya Briscoe, her face filling the upper right quadrant of the court monitor, continued speaking to someone off camera in a voice rich with contempt, entirely unaware that she had just said all of it, every word of it, directly into the record. If you have ever watched someone unravel in real time because they forgot the microphone was live, stay with me, because what Judge Caprio did next is the reason this story has been shared thousands of times. Subscribe before it's over. Drop a comment when you can't believe what you're hearing, because this is only the beginning. Tanya Briscoe was 46 years old, a manager at a mid-sized logistics company, appearing remotely from what appeared to be a home office, bookshelves staged behind her with the deliberate tidiness of someone who wanted to look credible on camera. She had been summoned to answer a small claims complaint filed by her former personal assistant, a 24-year-old named Priya Mehta, who was claiming $3,200 in unpaid wages for 6 weeks of work performed and never compensated. Priya was also appearing remotely, in a different rectangle on the screen, smaller somehow, though the pixels were the same size. She wore a pale yellow blouse. Her eyes were careful and tired in equal measure. Priya had worked for Tanya for 8 months before the arrangement collapsed. She had answered emails at midnight, coordinated travel, managed a social calendar, and for the final 6 weeks had done all of this without receiving a single payment, because Tanya had told her, repeatedly, that the wire was processing, and that she should stop being impatient, and that people who ask about money constantly make themselves look unprofessional. Priya had documented every exchange. She had screenshots, email threads, a spreadsheet of hours logged, and a voicemail in which Tanya told her that the delay was Priya's own fault for not submitting her hours in the right format. The format, it turned out, was one Tanya had invented after the fact, but none of that had been presented yet when the microphone incident happened. What Tanya said, believing herself to be muted, speaking to someone out of frame, was this. She called the proceedings a complete joke. She referred to Judge Caprio as some old man who has nothing better to do. She called Priya by a name that drew a sharp inhale from the gallery, and then she laughed, a bright, unbothered laugh, the laugh of a woman who considered herself to be backstage. She was not backstage. Judge Caprio waited until she finished. He waited through the laugh and the silence that followed it, and the moment when Tanya finally looked back at her screen and registered by the expression on the clerk's face that something had changed. Her own face shifted, not into remorse, not immediately, but into the specific recalibration of someone rapidly assessing damage. "Ms. Briscoe," Judge Caprio said. His voice was exactly as warm as it always was. That was the most unnerving thing about it. "Your microphone has been active this entire time." The courtroom went silent. Tanya Briscoe's mouth opened, closed. She looked off camera, then back. A flush began at her collarbone and moved upward. I apologize, Your Honor. I know what you thought," he said, and that was all he said about it for the moment, which was somehow more crushing than anything else he could have done. That's when everything changed, because Judge Caprio turned to Priya Mehta's rectangle on the screen and asked her gently to walk the court through her documentation. And Priya, who had been waiting quietly, carefully in her yellow blouse, opened her folder and began. The spreadsheet, the emails, the invented format, the voicemail. Each item entered into the record with the methodical precision of someone who had known, from the beginning, that the truth was her only resource and had therefore treated it with extraordinary care. Tanya interrupted twice, the first time to question the accuracy of Priya's hours log. Judge Caprio asked her to wait, the second time to suggest that Priya had misunderstood the employment arrangement. Judge Caprio looked at her through the screen with an attention so complete and so still that Tanya stopped mid-sentence and did not finish it. When Priya finished presenting, Judge Caprio sat with the record for a moment. Then he addressed Tanya Briscoe directly, and his voice carried the full, unhurried weight of everything he had seen and heard that morning. Ms. Briscoe, before this hearing began today, you described this court as a joke, and the person sitting across from you with a name I won't repeat in this record. I want you to understand what I actually saw this morning. I saw a young woman who worked for 6 weeks without pay, who was told her professionalism was the problem when she asked where her money was, who came into this proceeding with documentation so thorough and so careful that it answered every question before I could ask it. He paused. And I saw you, with your stage bookshelves and your unmuted microphone, and the absolute certainty that none of this applied to you. He looked at her steadily. The joke, Ms. Briscoe, was never this court. The joke was the idea that you could treat a person as disposable and then come here and call it a misunderstanding. He ruled in Priya's favor. The full $3,200 plus filing costs. He entered the audio recording of Tanya's unmuted comments into the court record and noted the conduct formally, recommending it be considered in any future proceedings involving the same party. He also noted for the record that the documentation Priya had provided represented one of the most organized small claims presentations his court had received in recent memory. What happened afterward was quieter, but no less significant. Priya used the judgment to retain a labor attorney who discovered that Tanya had a prior wage complaint filed against her by a different assistant 2 years earlier, settled quietly and confidentially. That prior complaint, now surfaced, formed the basis of a broader investigation by the State Labor Board. Tanya's company, upon learning of the proceedings and the audio record, placed her on administrative leave within the week. Priya Mehta got a new job 3 months later, one that paid her on time every time without requiring her to ask. The microphone was never the problem. Tanya Briscoe was always the problem. She just forgot, for 45 seconds, to hide it. And in a courtroom run by a man who has spent 3 decades listening for the truth in what people say when they think no one is paying attention, 45 seconds is more than enough. Share this if you believe that how you treat people when you think it doesn't count is exactly who you are. Comment below and tell me what you would have said when that microphone turned out to be live. Subscribe, because this channel exists for every Priya who documented everything and trusted that the truth, presented carefully, would be enough. In Judge Caprio's courtroom, it always is.